On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina.
All right, everybody, today's episode of the podcast is going to be another group episode. I'm going to have all the guys introduce themselves really quickly, and then we'll dive right in. So we'll go Al, Trevor, and then Derek, and then we'll go right in. So introduce yourselves, guys, and then we'll roll.
Al Sandoval. This is my start of my 14th season with the Texas Rangers organization.
Trevor Swartz. This is my 7th year in pro ball, all with the Colorado Rockies.
Derek Mendoza. This will be my 7th year as well, all with the Seattle Mariners.
Perfect. And so today we're going to talk some FRC stuff. I know you guys are well versed in it. You've all used it. I took the course in December at the Rockies place. Really, really good stuff. I've been using it for myself. We haven't dove into it too much as an organization, so I don't know how much I'll actually contribute. But I am looking forward to everything that you guys have to offer. So first and foremost, just your general thoughts on functional range conditioning, good, bad, just another piece of the puzzle, where it fits in the big picture for you, and then we'll kind of dive in deeper to the nitty-gritty stuff.
For me, I believe it's a huge and great piece of a larger puzzle. I don't believe it's the end-all, be-all with everything in training. However, this system for me has been the most simplistic and common sense system that I've used, within my training. At the end of the day, for me, it's a system. You have to have the knowledge and background to implement it just based upon who's in front of you, what type of athlete, any type of individual. But, it just gets you better at being human. And if you're better at being human, you are a better athlete, you're a better mover, you're a better whatever we're training you to be. So again, is it the end all be all? No, but I think this system puts you in the best place to make actual physical gains within your joints and their movements.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's one of those things where it's focused. It gives guys a focal point for specific joint training. It gives us as coaches specific things to be looking at with guys. And I think the other thing for us is it's teachable. I can teach someone how to do a car. I can teach someone how to do, a lift off or pails and rails. And the athlete themselves can actually take it and implement it on their own. Specifically, like with cars in the morning, they can implement that as part of their daily routine warm up. So it's a teachable thing that these guys can take and learn and do it on a daily basis on their own without us having to actually physically be there.
Yeah, and I would say exactly like Trevor now said. That's really the way I feel about it. I really enjoy it. I look at it as it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's a tool that I use a lot more often than my other tools. And it's really one of the bigger pieces for me right now that I've been using over the last 5 years. So.
Yeah, like I said, we haven't dove into it too much. Since taking that course, personally myself in my own lifting, I've been using it a lot. And I really, really do like it. One of the things that kind of stood out to me at the conference was how fully bought in they were on the system. And it was cool to have, the founder with us, and the guy from Westside was with us. So it wasn't just like, we do these mobility movements and we can do splits and whatever. It was like, this guy's a huge bencher at Westside, and he's using this in a system. So it applies to everybody. And like you guys said, it's just teaching you to move better as a human. What are some of the misconceptions about FRC? Like I said, I think one of them for me is the yoga aspect, right? We're just doing mobility training and we can do splits and stuff, but it isn't relevant. But that's not what the system is. So for you guys, what do you want people to better understand about the system of FRC, and what misconceptions have you heard?
I think the thing with the FRC is you go on Instagram, the social media presence, which for them is, it's it's very big, and they do a really good job of marketing themselves, and kudos to them for doing that. But you see these guys that, I mean, you look at Hunter, these other guys that are on there, and they're doing splits and all these crazy concepts of FRC, and it's like, that's not where these athletes are at or potentially can be at. So it's looking at the social media presence and going, okay, like, that's great. Having that range is awesome, but in our population, are those guys going to have access to those ranges? Most likely not. So scaling it back, and that's the nice thing about the system, is it's very, very scalable. You could have a 65-year-old doing it versus a 20-year-old athlete. So the scalability is there to where you can teach the same concepts to guys, so they're still getting that work in, but not at that level that you see on their social media presence, which, again, not a bad thing. It's just that they do a great job marketing. That's who they are. So
I think the biggest thing is understanding the thought process, because like Trevor said, they do such a great job with the social media presence, but it's not just about being flexible and being bendy. The whole concept of FRC and their thought process is just not gaining range, it's gaining quote unquote functional range and strengthening those ranges and controlling them. So when you look at it from afar, you kind of just basically see quote unquote yoga on steroids. To where if you understand the concepts and the thought processes of the whys, because to get to those positions that those guys are in, they do cars daily, they do pails and rails, they do hovers. So, I mean, I guess people, if they really want to understand it, it's not looking at just a glimpse of it. You have to understand the whole photo of what's going on and not just zooming in on the social media aspects, because in my personal opinion, the thought process makes complete sense as far as gaining the range, strengthening it at end and beginning range, so we're not just gaining passive mobility. And I think that that's what some people think about it is you're just gaining range, to where no, we're actually isolating joints, moving the joints in the ranges that they're supposed to be made. And as we're doing that, we're strengthening those joints and those ranges as we go.
Yeah, and I think there's a ton of misconceptions, I would say, but I would say people really tend to view it in like one of two ways. They either think it's the end all be all, or they think it's not good at all. And I think it's somewhere in between, but it is a great tool that I use, like I said, for most of my players. But there's always going to be those outliers that maybe just you don't need to use that. So that's what I love about the system, is it's a huge tool, but you also, I'm not married to it. I know that when I don't see some change, or that it might not work for this player, hey, let's go another route. Let's try to use something else. But I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions.
Well, and going off of what Derek said right there, like, it hits home, because again, we have so many tools in our toolbox. We have to know what athlete is in front of us and how to use it, to where sometimes, when yoga was the big thing, it's like, oh, let's have everybody do yoga. Well, we have a lot of hypermobile athletes. They don't need yoga. To where you can implement this process and okay, you already have the range you need to get there, but you have no strength within those degrees of range. So now we can implement this process. So I just think, like Derek said, I mean, it's a huge tool that I use a lot, because there's so many ways to use it. There's not just one end goal with it. You can use it to, have guys increase range and mobility who lack it, but you can also use it on the opposite side of the spectrum to get guys stronger within the ranges that they have, because it's not the flexibility, mobility that's an issue. It's the strength within those ranges that's the issue. So again, it's kind of it's not an end all be all piece, but it's a piece that you could use more often than not. It's not a one trick pony.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, they were really, really bought in during the seminar that we went to. And it was to the point that they were like, we'll replace full lifts until we get these guys doing these exercises. And for me, that was like, it was hard for me to grab, because a lot of guys like lifting nowadays. And if you tell a guy like, hey, you're not going to be squatting because you don't control your end range in hip internal or external or whatever, like, they're not going to buy into it. And so I think it's, like you said, knowing the athlete who's in front of you, finding a way how to plug this in appropriately, and then getting them to do it. And it's not just stretching. Like, for anybody that's never done it, and I think that was one of my biggest knocks, was because our seminar was FRC and FRA, I just don't think we did enough of the drills. Like, for me, I was going there hoping to get crushed. And talking to Trevor, like, he said to do a kin stretch class. So now I've been looking in and following them and doing some of those. And like, I got my wife doing them, and like, we love doing all those drills. It's not just stretching. And I think for me, that's the biggest misconception is like Trevor said, you see these guys on social media and they can do crazy things. It's like, well, we're not trying to get our baseball players to do full splits or anything. We're just trying to give them the opportunity to strengthen those ranges of motion. That's it. And that's really what the system is. Find that end range of motion and strengthen at those extreme ends, basically, at least in my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was where, for me, going through it a couple of years ago, initially, just with the FRC, you learn the concepts and the base introduction to the system. And it was like, okay, how far down this rabbit hole can we go? And it opens up, you got the FRA, the FR release, you got the kin stretch stuff. So the next step for me was going and doing the kin stretch, but we got blasted. And that was where you start to see, end range liftoffs, passive range holds. That's where they really start to implement those concepts of the system into it. So going through that kind of gave me a broader sense of how the system really can fit in with athletes. And then finally doing the FRA where, okay, you can start to assess guys now. That was kind of the tying piece together of what to use and when. I think that was the big ticket that we wanted to get out of the FRA, and that's what we got. But kin stretch really opened the door to expanding on all the concepts and really diving into everything.
Yeah, I'll second that, Trevor, as well. I mean, we did them back to back. We did the FRC and then I did the kin stretch. And while it was like a ton of information just thrown at you, being able to actually get into the kin stretch and going through positions and different exercises and different movements and all these things really kind of started to like fill in some of the gaps of where I was like, oh, I didn't understand that. What did he mean by that? And then once you actually get home, you kind of have a place of where, okay, let me kind of put a plan together because I don't understand all these concepts, but I can pick the one or two things that I think I have a good grasp on, and I'm going to start implementing those. And then that's kind of how I did it. And that's slowly how you just get a little bit better. I'm nowhere near where I want to be with the system because it's such a complex system, but yeah, I was able to, start slowly implementing things because of the kin stretch kind of combining those for me and really light bulbs going off. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive into how you guys are implementing it. I know a lot of you guys use it either on yourselves or with your athletes. Trevor, I've actually seen you guys use it in your setting at the spring training complex. So how are you using it? Is it an activation, like a warm up, a cool down, like during lifts as like not necessarily fillers, but like in between squat sets or something like that? Trevor, you mentioned the morning routine. Like for me, that was honestly my favorite part of that was just every day wake up and just moving through the different motions that they give and everything. So how are you guys implementing that?
Yeah, I think it's been a kind of a slow process for us finding kind of what Derek was saying, what to use and when to use it. I think for us, it kind of took some time to really evaluate what are our big rocks as far as what are we looking at joint wise with guys. So like for the shoulder, you're obviously looking at overhead flexion, internal, external shoulder, spinal mechanics, flexion, extension, and then hip, internal, external. So those for us, we're like, okay, those are our big rocks. That's what we're going to hammer. So last year it was doing kind of a warm-up activation deal before you lifted or before you went outside to do stuff. The buy-in was really good. It was kind of, hey, we have this offer for you guys. Let's see who's going to do it. So I think for our athletes, we probably had a good 50-50 split on who was actually like doing it. And then this year we decided, okay, we're going to have these warm-ups out for guys. And the nice thing is with these young guys in our instructional camps, we made them do it every day. So now they come in the weight room, they're conditioned to doing it. They do it every day now. And then we said, okay, just so everybody gets the shoulders, the hips, and the back, and we're going to start adding these in now to our actual warm-up. So if you watch our warm-up now, we have a sideline hip car right after we do our dynamic series. We have cat cows right after the sideline hip car. And then at the very end, we do shoulder cars. So we're seeing these things, and now our coaches have the knowledge of what are we looking for and assessing to, and it actually gives us really good conversation pieces with these guys of, hey, I saw this in your shoulder today. You come in after you're done on the field and let's work on some stuff. Or you can even have those conversation points with the coaches. Hey, we're seeing this with this guy in his warm-up. We see this. We're working on these things with this guy. What are you guys seeing on the field? Is this matching up? So it's given us a much broader application to where now we're actually having some really good conversation pieces with coaches and players alike.
See, with us, I started incorporating it last year just in basic activations. So I started to get away from the daily routine of just going outside and doing a dynamic with guys. And I started doing a lot of inside activation pieces. And in those inside activation pieces, I would just start adding simple cars with guys. Again, Trevor said it earlier, it's one of those things that you can teach guys to where once they do it in front of you a few times and you teach them how to irradiate and how to not compensate and things like that, they could do them on their own. So I picked the lowest hanging fruit. I wanted to do glenohumeral, I wanted to do scap, wanted to do hip, and that's what I focused on, and wrist. I focused on those 4, and I just hammered those 4. This year we added Rob Fumagalli, who Derek knows over from Seattle very well, who's, implemented a ton of it. And this year we've expanded upon that. And with the major league group, we added that into our daily warm-ups outside. Again, we just picked a couple of them and we introduced them to guys. And then again, now we're starting to expand. Once we explain the concept of irradiation, not compensating and moving slow through the movements, teaching those things first, now we can start teaching other movements and stuff. With our more advanced guys, guys who really like it and who bought in, started doing a lot of Pales Rails stuff with them, end range control type stuff. So again, we take it from an athlete by athlete basis, but we have some guys who are at the tail end of their careers who have a difficult time loading, or who have had low back problems or back problems who don't like to load. So we'll use a lot of this FRC training to incorporate a lot of isometric holds, isometric loading, with free agent guys who aren't used to the way we lift, because with Texas, we lift heavy. So, we're allowing them to do something different. That's not just their PRI stuff, different things like that. So we're incorporating it in a lot of different ways, but I will say at least throughout the organization, we're adding at least a shoulder car, at least a hip car, and an ankle car within our daily activations, to where our guys are learning how to do this. And the cool thing is that I found with it, I was a little hesitant when I started doing it with the guys, just because it's new. It's a new concept and it's different. Last year it was pretty cool. You see guys pre-game warm-up doing shoulder cars, or you see a pitcher's mound visit and you look over and your shortstop's doing a glenohumeral car or a hip car. Like, guys really gravitated towards it just because they liked the way it made them feel. It was different. They're able to do movements, and they felt a difference, obviously, because they continue to do it on their own. Whereas you guys know, our athletes, typically, if they don't like something, they're not going to do it on their own. And like, I encouraged our guys in AAA, we fly all the time. Hey man, do your morning routine before you get to the field. You've been up since 6 a.m., your hips are locked. So we started incorporating a lot of this stuff. I'd teach it to them at the field, and I'd tell them to do it at their hotel room or at their house before they'd come into the field. And a lot of guys liked it and integrated that way as well.
Yeah, we use it in many different ways. And the thing that I think we got a pretty good grasp on it was we didn't have much turnover in our minor league system for like the last 4 or 5 years. There was maybe 1 or 2 guys. And so the guys who had taken the FRC course with us in the kin stretch, we all kind of have been together for a while. So we all have, a good idea of the concept, and then have different areas where we're a little bit better at. And so that really helped us in the way we implemented it. So we would use it as part of a warm-up, more like doing some cars. Then we'd use it in activations. We'd use it during the lift. If it was an upper body lift, we'd use it as a lower body filler in one of the complexes. Likewise for the lower body movement. And then if it was a total body movement, we'd fit it in when they're doing an opposite movement. So we also started integrating it in the warm-up, the stretch right before they get ready, for pitchers get ready to throw. We're doing shoulder cars, we're doing scap cars, we're doing wrist cars, so I think we've done a really good job of implementing it. So guys have a really good concept of it. And then this year during spring training, I started running a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, kind of like kin stretch class. And, we'd have anywhere from 5 to 15, 16 guys that really just, come in and love it. And, so a lot of the players have bought in. But I think ideally what we've tried to do is get our guys, before they come to the field, to get that daily car routine in the morning. I like that because they're more like, they've already taken their joints to the full range of motion, and then they feel ready to go when they come to the to the field, and then all they have to do is worry about, getting that core temperature up, some activations, and bam, let's get a workout in. So yeah, that's how we've been implementing it and using it.
Yeah, like I said, for me with that course, honestly, the best part, the biggest takeaway for me was that morning routine. Like, if there was one thing that I was going to bring back to our org and kind of present to our head guy, it was the morning routine idea. Wake up in the hotel after a long flight or in the minor leagues after a long bus ride and just get yourself moving. Like, start your day on the right foot. And I've been doing it myself. And I mean, speaking only from my own experience, population N equals 1, but I feel better when I do it in the mornings, you know what I mean? Versus when I don't. And like my lifts, I just feel like I can just hop into my lifts a little bit quicker instead of like, oh man, I feel like I got hit by a truck. It's going to take me a little longer to get going. Like when I pop out of bed, just do my morning routine, boom, the rest of my day is good. So for me, like, and the other thing that's valuable here is that players are going to do it in the off season. We actually had a kid who came up to me and he was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of like functional range conditioning?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I took a course in the off season." And he was like, "Dude, I've been taking kin stretch classes like 2-3 times a week. And like, could you show me some stuff and just keep me fresh during spring training?" And so for anybody that hasn't done it yet or hasn't really dove into it, like it is becoming an important part of baseball. And people are starting to differentiate between just, passive stretching for the sake of stretching and actually controlling ranges of motion. And so if you're not educated on it and a player comes to you, I mean, you're already behind the 8 ball. So it's another one of those things that if you at least have some knowledge of it, even if you're not using it extensively, a player is going to come up to you at some point in time, whether it's from another organization or just from their own off-season training. Players are becoming more and more educated now. And so we need to stay more and more educated as well. And so it kind of guides me into where I want to go next. Do you guys have any advice on like where to find more information, or like, could you speak on the courses that you've taken a little bit further, or just any way that you seen it yourselves implemented and how it could effectively be implemented somewhere else?
I mean, for me, to understand the FRC system, I mean, you really have to understand the theories behind it. Unfortunately, I mean, the only way you really get those theories is by doing a course, because then you get online access to everything. I will say that is the cool thing about FRC is once you pay to do just the basic FRC course, you have access to that stuff forever. So all their updated research, all their updated webinars, all their updated videos, all their updated car routines, you're going to have access to forever. The best way to learn about it, me personally, I believe, is talking to somebody who has a good amount of experience and who understands the theories behind it, because it is very complex, but it's simplistic and it makes sense if you understand why. Bina does a tremendous job speaking upon it. And again, not just speaking and selling, but speaking and going off research. I mean, all on the field now to where I think we're open to a lot of things, but we could call BS on a lot of things as well. And I think he does a very, very good job of not giving you the BS meter, or personally, he did it. Again, do I agree with 100% of all the concepts? No, but I agree with a vast majority of them. And I believe that it helps. Their social media presence is also very good. But again, you have to have your filters up on the social media presence, because Dewey targets a different crowd than Hunter. Hunter targets a different crowd than wherever. I think Frank Duffy, he's been doing a lot of this with Cressy's Place for a long time now. And now for me, I'm like, oh, that's where they're getting a lot of this stuff. So I think once you start understanding the concepts and the principles, you start seeing a lot of people that you follow or you listen to, they've implemented it already. They're just doing it in different ways. But the best way for me is to actually be purchasing the class and learn it on your own, or really dive in with somebody who has a lot of experience with it, who can explain it to you.
Yeah, I would definitely say, same thing is one of two things is you either have to decide, okay, I don't really have interest in it. Or you have to decide, okay, if I'm going to really learn it, I need to take a deep dive into it and actually learn the system and actually learn how to implement it. Because I think that's a big missing part. If you're not going to take the time to do that, I somewhat feel like you're wasting your time unless you have somebody, like Al said, that really understands and that will take the time to teach you. because I know probably all of us can attest to this, is like you get on Instagram or you see somebody at a gym and you see them trying to implement some of the things that look like they're supposed to be FRC and they're doing them completely wrong, or the guys don't have the range to be doing, even trying things, or the control to be trying things. So I would say one of the two things is if you decide you want to do it, take a deep dive in, take the course. Like Al said, you have all the stuff for life that you can go in and continually just relearn. Okay, what concept don't I understand? Okay, let me go learn about that concept, because it's all online after you've taken the course. Or if you're somebody that, you know what, I don't have the resources to go pay for that, I don't want to use my continuing education budget for that or something, get around somebody really good that's been implementing it for a long time, and not just somebody that maybe just kind of knows about it, but you've seen them implement different types of the FRC system. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I mean, going through now 3 of the seminars that they offer, it's invaluable. I mean, I think for me, learning it in the FRC was great, but really that big step was doing kin stretch. I think that was the one where it was like, okay, I got it. And then actually, and again, like you guys said, finding people that know it and you can talk about it with. I've had a lot of discussions about it, how to implement it with athletes, and it's everywhere. I mean, a couple of the guys at Altus have gone through it. They know those guys. I had a good discussion with those guys up at Altus about the FRC system and how they implement it on their recovery days. So finding that population and then just playing with it. Once you understand the concepts and you yourself can play with it, I think that's one of the things of self-discovery where, oh, I saw this in a kin stretch class. I'm going to try this out and see how this feels. Or going and finding a kin stretch instructor. We're lucky here. There's a guy that we know that he does kin stretch. He's a yoga instructor, but does kin stretch. So he implements these concepts combined with some yoga concepts where you're still getting that joint specific training and working on end ranges and hovers and also doing some yoga stuff. So there's that mindfulness component to it as well. So finding those practitioners, I think that's another thing that guys can do is gravitate towards that.
And I think that's the biggest thing that Trev said. Number one, obviously, before we can implement things as coaches, we have to understand the theories behind it. So for me, that's first and foremost. But there's no secondary with this system than performing it on yourself. That's me personally. One, because it's so different and it's so complex. I mean, I never loaded my joints prior to doing this. We always lift. We lift weights. We run. We do plyometrics. But the sensation and how you feel from pails and rails is something that you'll never feel before unless you do it. So you have to understand, what does it mean to load at 30%, 40%? How does my body feel the next day? So number one is understanding the concepts behind the system, but at the end of the day, the proof's in the pudding as well. I mean, I'm not just saying it because we're on this webcast. I mean, I've felt tremendously better since I've just simply done the morning routine. I mean, for me and all of us with our athletes, we're dummies. We're guinea pigs, whether it be nutrition, whether it be whatever. I'm sure we all do it on ourselves before we even bring it to these guys. So like, this is the one thing that I've done that's been simple that has made a dramatic difference in just how I feel daily. I mean, I don't have knee pain like I had at the beginning. I don't have a pinch in my right hip like I do anymore when I squat. I mean, and a lot of that comes from doing these on my own. And again, trying it out on yourself, because once you see how your body responds, you're going to see how your athlete's going to respond, because it's completely different than doing a 3x5 or a 3x. We know how that feels. As strength guys, we know how the periodization process and how sprinting for the first time in a long time, how our legs are going to feel the next day. Doing these concepts is completely different feeling and completely different adaptation. So it's learning it first. And then once you understand the premise of it, go do it. Because once you start doing it, then I learned that way anyway. But man, that's when light bulbs started popping off for me. Like, oh, I mean, I can do this at this time. I can't do this. I can't do lower body pails and rails on a heavy lower body day in general. So how am I going to fit this in?
Yeah, I have a test subject. My wife is big into lifting now. And so for me, I can see where her mobility issues are or anything. And I've kind of shown her some of the FRC stuff. And the other day I looked outside and she's just doing, cars in our turf out here in the backyard. And it's like what you guys have been saying. It's like, this is a system where once you give it to athletes, they feel how good it makes them feel. They just do it on their own. And so for me, I've done it myself. I've had her doing it. And we've been able to make good progress for her, and like her main lifts are improving because her end range control is improving with this stuff, and it's just awesome to see, and it's awesome to feel. So I'm there with you, Alec. You have to try it yourself. And I will never forget how at that conference we went to, how the pails and rails just made me feel like you got crushed on one side of your body. And it was like, I really need to do the other side to get some balance and how bad I'm going to feel on both sides. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to go through that again, because it was really, it was really intense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you're doing the FRA and they look at your plantar flexion and they say, oh, you have no plantar flexion in your right ankle. You suck.
Yeah. They don't hold anything
As
back.
I got called out in the seminar.
Yeah. One of the things I really like about, or that really kind of stuck with me, is like, you know, they talk about the concept of force is the language of cells. And I always looked at that as like, okay, well, I lift weights, I crush weights. And then once you start going through some of the FRC stuff and you're like, okay, like I'm understanding, I'm sending this feedback back and forth and it's getting this afferent feedback. And all of a sudden, like, whoa, my ranges are expanding. And then one of the other things that I think really kind of got me to understand this a little bit more was, I think it was Spina. He talks about, you know, you have way more range than you actually think you do, right? It's like, you know, you get into a specific flexibility stretch or something, and you're like, oh, if I stretch any more, I'm going to tear my muscles. And then all of a sudden you do an isometric contraction, and then now you've opened more range. So it's like you have more range than you think. You just have to convince your nervous system to allow you access to that. And then you have to do some stuff to solidify and work in that range. But that was one of the things that kind of like got me thinking. I'm like, okay, this has a lot more to do with the nervous system than we even think, you know? And so I think that's where, as we start to learn more about the nervous system, it's going to make this FRC thing so much, like the functional range system in general, just so much better for us. But
no doubt. And it's easy to show guys too. I think that's the other thing. You can do a table test on a guy. Hey, this is your passive. Show me your active. Okay, you can get there. We just got to train you to get there. And you got to, and it's easy to show these guys, and they go, oh, now I know. Okay, I can get into that. I just need to train myself. And that helps with the buy-in, and it leads into all of these sorts of good discussions with guys. And so 100% agree with you on that one.
Yeah, especially after you show them the difference between the active and passive and tell them like, hey, this is the range you're more than likely to get hurt in. We've got to close this range a little bit more. We got to get the active and passive a little closer, you know, so it makes it an easier sell, and easier. It's not really a sell, but they get the understanding of it a lot better.
Yeah.
Guys, are there any drills that you would recommend if there's any baseball, you know, players listening, or parents that have kids that play, or just anybody maybe specifically tailored toward baseball with these FRC drills? Is there any like 2 or 3 that your absolute go-tos with guys? I know, Al, you mentioned like we just presented a couple of guys and mastered those. Like, what are the drills that are your big rock drills, so to speak?
I would say, like, in general, it doesn't matter to me if you're like a young kid or in baseball. I would say you're going to benefit with the cars. That would be my first step with anybody. It'd be like, hey, let's show you what this feels like, and let's start getting you working in all the outer ranges of your joint. And then a couple, I mean, I just like Trevor and Al both alluded to, I look at it as what are the biggest things we need for you know, baseball players, are the biggest things we need to think about. And for me, I always think shoulder, hip, and then usually wrist, or, you know, you can do multiple other things, but those are the things that can affect, you know, a wrist can affect, you know, how they can pronate, supinate, and stuff like that. And if we can include some range. So I would say knock down some cars. I would say 90-90 positional stuff for hips, usually, because you can do a lot of the active and passive stuff, or a lot of the active stuff in that position. And then for the shoulders, any type of circles or cars, you can do them in many different ways. So just figuring out ways, what positions, different positions do them. Half kneeling, against the wall, tall kneeling, just side lying. There's so many different ways that you can do them, but just really cars is what I think.
I 100% agree with everything Dee just said. I really don't have much to add to it. He hit it right on the head. Again, I think that's the basic foundation of the whole system anyway. And once you master those, that's what's huge, because again, they look so simple from people who do them all the time, But I mean, the afferent feedback, and I mean, fortunately for us, we for the most part deal with high-level athletes who can get into those positions. I mean, go do stuff with general public. You get what I mean? A lot of those people can't get overhead flexion. They can't get their arm where it needs to be. So just teaching people how to move their body like it was meant to be moved is huge. So from a baseball standpoint, I mean, whether you're a young high school kid or anything else, that's the biggest thing that hit me with that from the afferent feedback standpoint was the toe cars. I'm sure the first time we all did those at the seminars, you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? But the crazy thing is how fast you can learn them after doing them for a week or two. But I mean, and that's kind of one of the biggest things that stuck with me is it's like, again, I can do all these things. It's just I have to teach myself to do them. Well, how do you do that? By doing the cars, by doing the morning routine. So I think, you know, you can learn that, you can teach yourself. And then from there, then you start taking the next steps with the, you know, pails, rails, hovers, the fancy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah, master the basics. I think that's the big thing that you guys have said is just master the basics. The morning routine, the cars. I mean, I'll catch myself doing a wrist car on the couch, just watching Netflix with my wife, and she'll look at me, she'll be like, what are you doing now? I'm like, oh, you think it's easier? I was like, try this. And I'll show her how to radiate and make sure she's doing it right. She goes, oh, I can actually feel it. I'm like, yeah, like, come on. You know, she's starting to do them. So it's this whole like monkey see, monkey do almost, but doing them when you can, where you can is what I tell guys too. Like once you understand cars, hey, if you feel like you're just standing around doing nothing, bust out a wrist car. Bust out, like Al was saying about his shortstop doing shoulder cars. Like just do those when you can. Move it as much as you can. It's basic joint hydraulics. Like your body's not, it's not going to kill you to do 100 hip cars. I mean, it's really not. It's the best thing you can do realistically.
Yeah, I'll sit on the couch and do ankle cars. And Al, it's funny you bring up like the big toe thing. Like for me, that was one of the quotes in the seminar. He was like, can you move your big toe? No. Can I? Yeah. Is it important? I don't know, but I can move it and you can't. So yeah, probably fine. And since then, I'm like, I mean, I don't know like what it is, but like I tried it and I couldn't move my toes. And I was like, well, this is kind of weird. And now like I can do it. Like I can sit there and move my toes individually. And like, honestly, the thing for me is like being able to do that has helped my feet feel the ground more. So when I squat, when I deadlift, or even like when I sprint, do plyos, like I feel my calves and my lower leg working because my feet are so into the ground. Like I can just feel it. And I'm like, well, I'm convinced I'm just going to keep doing this. So I'll do like weird stuff with my toes and my wife will look at me like, what are you doing? Like, don't worry about it. Like, I'm training right now. Okay. Like I'm always training, you know, there's always time to do some sort, but no, for me, like that, you know, going back to our last talking point, the seminar, piece for me was huge because I had wanted to learn it. And this one was so valuable because it was FRC and FRA, and it was at the Rockies complex, and it was with a bunch of other people in pro ball. So I knew the questions would be relevant. I knew all the experience would be relevant. And I knew that like the blinders that the presenters might have might be exposed by all the people in the room that, hey, we don't necessarily have the time for this. We don't have the space for this, whatever it was, you know what I mean? And so for me, I want to piggyback on what you guys said is like, find the people who have been using it, and especially in your setting, and kind of run with it. And that's why I had you guys on, is because you have all used it in the professional baseball setting. So you can speak on, you know, the specifics of how you do it in your setting versus how somebody in the college setting does it and how they differ. And so I appreciate you guys coming on. And before we wrap up, I just want closing thoughts from you guys. Any big takeaways that you want people to leave this podcast with, get them out on the table now, and then we'll wrap it up from there.
Yeah, I think if you're a coach and you haven't gone through it yet, and I don't know coaching philosophies where people stand, but I know that for me and the people that I've talked to about it that have gone through it all, Al and Chris, I know you guys have talked to me before going through it, but just go through the seminar. Just go through it and at least give it the college try and learn it. And that way it's going to open up a lot of doors for you. I think that's the biggest thing for coaches. And then always understanding, starting with the basics, you know, start with the cars when you're teaching it to guys. That's a good selling point for guys to listen to what you're saying and start to feel it and really start to learn it on their own. And then you can start diving in. And that's, I think, the beauty of the system. But I think for coaches that are on the fence about it, I would say do it it gives you another tool in the toolbox that, in my opinion, is a very big tool. And just go through it. And if you're a coach that's gone through it and you haven't dove into the Kinstrit side or the FRA side, keep going down it and keep learning it, because the more you go through it and the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it and the better you're going to understand it, and the more impactful you'll be as a coach.
For me, I mean, I think we've all said it. I mean, is it the end all be all? No, absolutely not. There's a lot of other things that go into what we do with training athletes. But Derek said it better earlier. It's a tool in the toolbox, but for me, it's a tool in the toolbox, but think of a 3-in-1 tool. It's my hammer, it's my Phillips, and it's my, it's my screwdriver. And you could do everything with all those tools. So again, I mean, we have a lot of other variables that we have to do within our job to train our athletes to make sure that they are, ready to play and perform every day. But I use this system a ton because it's so, you can use it with hypermobile guys, with guys who lack mobility, with guys who are good athletes, but still we can get a little bit more out of their ankle to get them in better position. It's just been one of the better, if not the best, continuing ed that I've taken, because again, once I understood the theory behind what they're trying to do, you can utilize it with anybody from our parents to our grandparents to elite level athletes. You can use it just based upon using your knowledge and the knowledge that we all have in the strength and conditioning field to fit anybody or anything that we need. It's not just, I can only use this with this person, or I can only use that with that person. So again, I think it's a good tool for people to dive into, but again, don't just go into it. If you're going to go in, Derek said earlier, you kind of have to go in and be like, I want to go in and understand this and utilize it. Because if you're kind of just half in, half out, you're not going to get a whole lot out of the theory and the system.
Yeah, both of you touched on some really important things. I think the only thing I would say to add is look at like the compounding effect of this. I think Jeff Olson's book, The Slight Edge, is a perfect illustration of the FRC concept, or the CARS concept. Is like the things that are easy to do are also easy not to do. And the more you do those things that are easy to do, those are those easy decisions. Like, oh, I can do my CARS today, or I cannot do my CARS. But over time, you get that compounding effect where, a month later, like Chris, you were alluding to with the toe CARS, a couple weeks later, you look like, oh man, now I have control and I can do things with my toes. So I think just look at the long-term gain, but also being intentional about the day. Hey, let me knock my CARS out every day, so that way a month from now, I can make some real gains. So.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Guys, I really appreciate you coming on, spending some time with me, and sharing your thoughts on the system, and we'll be in touch real soon. Stay safe. Thanks, and talk to you guys in a bit.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, guys.
All right, everybody. That concludes this episode with Derek, Al, and Trevor. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you are looking to get into the functional range conditioning system, these three guys are really, really well versed in it, and I'd strongly recommend reaching out to them. 3 things that I took from these guys in the episode: master the basics, learn from others who know the system, and understand that this is only a tool in the toolbox, but it may become an important tool for you. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.